What is up, besties, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Scotty Holiday. I'm a queer creator and huge Star Wars nerd, so if you're into either one of those things, please consider subscribing and following me on social media at Scotty Holiday SW for all my latest Star Wars content. Today, I want to talk about the new Star Wars novel, Star Wars Inquisitor, Rise of the Red Blade by Delilah S. Dawson. I recently got this book the other week, finished it faster than I have finished any book in my entire life, and today I want to talk about it, kind of give a non-spoiler review, and then go into some spoilers that I wanted to talk about as well. So I'll make sure to put a timestamp so that way if you haven't read the book yet, or you just want a review of it without spoiling anything because you're thinking about reading it, I got you covered. So, Rise of the Red Blade tells the story of Iskat Akaris from her rise to Jedi Knight during the Clone Wars up until she becomes an Inquisitor. The story itself was super intriguing to me because I'm a little spooky ooky. I like dark side stories about the Inquisitors. So if you're looking for a story about Inquisitors and getting, answers to questions we've had about them for so long, this book definitely has that. Though I will say the majority of the book takes place during the Clone Wars, so it's more Clone Wars heavy than actually Inquisitor heavy. I personally was hoping for more of an Inquisitor story, so the fact that it took place during the Clone Wars the majority of the time, I didn't love that going into it, but with me being such a huge Clone Wars fan, I did enjoy it while I was reading the book. The book itself is really enjoyable to read. It gives you a view of the Clone Wars that we've never seen before. We get, more information in the Jedi Temple with the Jedi Masters, the ins and outs of what the Clone Wars looked like from inside the temple rather than on the battlefield, which, that's basically all we got in the actual TV series. So it's a good story and it was a really entertaining read. Iskat, I wouldn't say she's necessarily a tragic character like a lot of the Inquisitors are. And, as we went through the novel, it really seemed like that's how things were headed. There wasn't really any question on whether or not Iskat would eventually embrace the dark side, because it was almost like she was feeling a call to the dark side since she was born. What Iskat really craves the entire time is freedom, and we know with the Jedi's dogmatic ways, at least as they were at the time that this book takes place, there's not really any freedom, whether that's freedom of emotions, freedom to just go and do as you please. All of that's pushed down, and their only focus is serving the Republic and keeping the peace, because they're peacekeepers, not soldiers. But as every Clone Wars story shows us, they are definitely soldiers. They've lost their way. We all know how it goes, so I'm not going to get into that. After I finished the book, I did expect a little bit more from it, but it's still a good story. I don't know if I would read it again, but it was a fun read, I'm not gonna lie. I definitely want to make sure I'm honest with y'all, and in general, it's a good story. Alright, so now we're gonna get into spoiler territory. So we start off the book meeting Iskat and her Jedi Master Sember Vay as they are on the hunt for some Jedi artifacts, and we learn that their relationship is kind of strained. Throughout the book, Iskat feels like her master doesn't really like her, and that carries through until the end of this story. They're eventually called back from their trip to the Jedi Temple as the eruption of the Clone Wars starts with the Battle of Geonosis. And the Battle of Geonosis is what kind of sets off in Iskat's head that the one thing she feels like she is good at is killing. It's kind of dark, so her fate makes a lot of sense. Now, one of the main plot points of the book is the fact that Iskat doesn't know what her species is, doesn't know where she came from, and no one will give her any answers. Iskat's master dies during the Battle of Geonosis, and in her dying words, she tells Iskat, "I'm sorry, Feyre, I tried. Feyre, I couldn't stop it. She's so much like you. You made me promise to help her, and I did, but there was only so much I could do. I kept my promise. She's a good Padawan. You would be proud. She tries so hard, Feyre, but maybe I was never enough." And then after she returns to the Jedi Temple, she's required to clean out her master's chambers, and she finds a hidden yellow lightsaber, which of course I was just excited because it was a yellow lightsaber. But this kind of puts Iskat on the hunt of maybe this is Feyre's lightsaber, and who is this Feyre to begin with? Eventually, she believes that Feyre was possibly someone she is related to, that they were the same species based on the lightsaber build, and this starts a long plot point of Iskat trying to figure out who Feyre is. She believes she could be her mother, and eventually we do find out that Feyre was indeed her mother. It's a really sad point in the book when we learn of Feyre's fate, because of course the whole time Iskat is just searching for that belonging and searching for who she is. She does find her family eventually, but in the end she isn't able to find her mother because her mother unfortunately took her own life. I won't get into it a ton, but it's pretty heavy. And I really enjoyed just the story of, even after Iskat became an Inquisitor and she was fully embracing the dark side, when she went and met her family, she put all of that aside and she finally felt love for the first time and nurturing and truly cared about and understood. It was a really good part of the book, and it happened so late, but you know, it's a long time coming. Like I said, this whole finding out her species, learning where she came from, figuring out who Feyre is, learning that she's her mother, it's a huge reoccurring plot point in the book, and towards the end we do finally get that payoff, which was great. She is eventually knighted as a Jedi Knight, as the Jedi Order needs more Jedi because so many of them died in the Battle of Geonosis. So she goes through the knighting ceremony. We learn about a time when she was a youngling where she accidentally killed one of her friends with a column, so a lot of the Jedi she has grown up with are scared of her, talk about her behind their back, they don't trust her, and this just adds fuel to her fire of not feeling like she belongs. And of course we know the Jedi are not necessarily the most loving and nurturing, so she grows up feeling alone and like an outcast the entire time. As she's knighted with a lot of the people who she was in a youngling clan with, and of course they don't really like her. They question why she's even being allowed to be knighted, all except one of her friends, Tualon, who is a Twi'lek, who is also knighted in the same ceremony. Throughout the novel, you know, she kind of hints that she may have like a little crush on him, like he's the only one who she's really felt like she can be mostly herself around, so that continues throughout the book as well. So after their kind of back and forth relationship of them being friends, them being close friends, him not trusting her, growing their friendship again, after their second mission together, Order 66 happens. The Emperor calls on Iskat and basically has the clones get her to safety to fulfill her purpose. And she leaves Tualon basically to die. Not because, you know, she wants him to die, but because she wants this chance of freedom that she was finally promised. And one of the best things is the fact that Palpatine has like one or two appearances really in the book, but in those appearances we see him planting the seeds of doubt in Iskat and kind of telling her, you know, you're meant for more, and you know, the Jedi should hold you in high regards because you're gonna do really well someday. Like, he's already planting those seeds, and I love when we see the little things like that sprinkled through Star Wars. It's just, you know, it makes me so happy to see that continuity. Now, after Iskat becomes an Inquisitor, eventually we learn that Tualon also becomes an Inquisitor. He did not die during Order 66, after Iskat basically left him to die. And I'm kind of bummed because of the San Diego Comic-Con exclusive book cover, which is beautiful, by the way. I love the artwork with the two of them, with, you know, them in their Inquisitor getup, and in the reflection below we see them as Jedi. But the only thing that kind of sucks about it is it kind of spoiled that Tualon was going to be an Inquisitor as well by the end of the story. So I think it would have hit a little bit more for me seeing him come back, learning that he wasn't dead and that he did become an Inquisitor. I feel like it would kind of give me that tragic Inquisitor storyline that I feel like we're so used to, but that I love. I love a complex, sometimes tragic character, and, you know, at one point Iskat held him in high regard as like a model Jedi. So the fact that he eventually became an Inquisitor and went through all the torture and, you know, everything that they go through together before in the Order and then as their time as Inquisitors, I think it would have paid off a little bit more. Granted, you know, they were both in the Darth Vader comic series, but they weren't necessarily named in there, so if you didn't read the comic like I didn't, it wouldn't have been a spoiler. But, you know, oh well. They eventually do form a relationship and end up, you know, dying together, and that's when they eventually get that freedom that they had been craving. So it is a tragic story, but I just feel like the payoff, it didn't pay off as much as I would have liked it to. And I think that's because, like I said, the spoiler of the cover showing that they both did become Inquisitors. It was really interesting as well learning about Iskat and her relationship with the Jedi Order. Like I said, the Jedi Order in their height of just dogma and, you know, becoming warriors and losing, you know, what made them followers of the Force and more followers of the Republic. And I love a good Clone Wars story, so this gave me everything I needed there. I got a little bit more Clone Wars than I necessarily expected to. I did want a little bit more of the Inquisitors. However, we did learn some fun things like how the Inquisitors were recruited, how they survived Order 66, how they got their uniform, training that they underwent, torture that they underwent. We learned that some joined willingly, some had to be tortured into becoming Inquisitors, which we saw first in Jedi Fallen Order, and we also learned how they got their lightsabers. So there was a lot of cool backstory in, or maybe not backstory, but like unanswered questions that we learned about the Inquisitors through this book, and that I really appreciated. I just wish we got a little bit more with the Inquisitors. I mean, spoiler alert, Iskat dies at the end, so this is basically her entire life story. And unfortunately, she dies because that's the only place that she has true freedom. She didn't have freedom with the Jedi. She was promised freedom with the Inquisitorius, and it ended up kind of being the same thing in a sense. And the only time she has that true freedom is when she finally dies, which is tragic and sad. But I don't know, it didn't hit me as hard as I expected it to. Some of my favorite quotes from the book were one where she first meets Toulon after he's become an Inquisitor, and they meet within the Inquisitorius headquarters on Coruscant. She says, "Either way, she couldn't help Toulon with this fight, and she had to protect herself. It was almost ironic. She had caused herself damage trying to fit in with the Jedi, and now Toulon was suffering damage as he found his place among the Inquisitors." Once Iskat is given her first mission by the Grand Inquisitor, he tells her, "Do not give them a chance to speak, to poison you with their rhetoric, for they will attempt to sway you with their weak persuasion and pathetic mewling. You are a Jedi no longer." And it's so funny because it reminds me of like cults or like organized religion, where it's like, don't listen to these people because they are definitely wrong. They're going to tell you that what we're doing is not right. They're going to try to tell you to do something different, but they're wrong. Do not listen to them. It's just like keeping a hold of that person and basically stripping them of any right of choosing and saying that this is where you belong. Do not listen to anybody else because they're going to try to tell you what you're doing is wrong, because it is wrong. But it's like, it just goes back to showing that Iskat really didn't have the freedom that she wanted in the end, and that she craved so much throughout the entire story, I guess throughout her entire life, and it's really sad. And another just sad part of the freedom she thought she'd have with the Inquisitors, she says, "Funny how even here, among those better suited to taking lives than saving them, Iskat still felt like the odd one out." It's just really sad. I just wanted to give Iskat a hug and be like, "Girl, I see you. You are valid. It is okay." Like, it's just so unfortunate. And I know myself, and I'm sure plenty of people can relate to feeling different. And no matter what that difference is, whether, you know, you accept it about yourself eventually, but if other people around you don't accept it or tell you it's wrong, it can lead to self-hatred. It can lead to internalized hate against yourself. In Iskat's mother, Farah's case, it can lead to someone taking their own life because they feel like that's their only way out, or the only way to have freedom. And like, I'm in a good place now in my life, but I have been in some dark points as well, and that's why the author's note at the beginning of the book really hit me hard and, I mean, made me cry while I was reading it. Delilah Dawson writes, "If you struggle with mental health, please know that it gets better, that there is always hope, that there is always a reason to go on, even if it seems like a terribly small reason, that you are loved, that the galaxy needs you in it, and that your absence would be a tragedy. You have your own story to tell. There are resources out there and people who will listen." And she's totally right. We all crave that freedom to be who we are, but during Iskat's time in the Jedi Order, She felt like she wasn't allowed to be who she was and that she had to hide and conceal that from everybody else. Like I said, I just wanted to give her a hug so bad. Like, they did her dirty, and I know they didn't try to do her dirty, but like, that era, these poor people, they just needed some therapy and a hug and love, just to be told that they were valid. I'm sure it's like that for a lot of the Inquisitors. I mean, Trill is a good example of that. And then the last quote towards the end of the novel that hit extremely hard with just everything that had gone on since the beginning. When she stood there, surrounded by troopers with blasters, forced to choose death or something else, the Grand Inquisitor had promised her freedom. This is no freedom. The book ends with the following line: her blade through his chest, his blade through one of her hearts. There was a rightness to it, a completed circle, and he was right. Iskat Akaris was finally free. So those are my thoughts on Inquisitor Rise of the Red Blade, and I want to hear your thoughts. Let me know down in the comments below what you thought of the book, if you plan on reading it, and just how you felt in the end about the story altogether. Make sure to subscribe and consider joining my Discord to keep the conversation going, and you can also follow me on social media at Scotty Holiday SW for all my latest Star Wars content. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, may the Force be with you.